I want to thank everyone for joining tonight. We're going to give everyone a couple more minutes just to settle in and make sure that they have their computers on and their audio connected, and maybe a few late stragglers to get signed in. And we'll begin in just a few moments.
Gracias a todos por estar con nosotros esta noche. Vamos a comenzar en unos momentos. Vamos a permitir que otras personas se unan con nosotros, ya sea que ellos quieran conectarse por medio de audio o por medio de la computadora. Gracias.
All right, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining the City of Palmdale's Avenue Q Complete Streets Project. This webinar and virtual public meeting is being hosted by the City of Palmdale and SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments. The meeting will begin shortly, but to join the meeting, please make sure you are connected through your computer and your audio. If you have both your phone and your computer on, you'll hear an echo. So if you could please turn one of those off, that'll solve the problem. If you would like to join via phone, you can please use the follow dial-in information. The phone number is 669-900-6833. The webinar ID is 975-2220-1151. And the passcode is 5851. Also, if you have not already, you can use the time to take our survey at the project website, which is avenueqcorridor.com. Again, the survey is located on the website at avenueqcorridor.com.
Bienvenidos. Gracias por estar con la ciudad de Palmdale con respecto al proyecto de mejoras completas de la calle de la avenida Q. Esta reunión es una reunión virtual y esta reunión va a empezar brevemente. También esta reunión se está llevando a cabo en conjunción con Skype. Para unirse a la reunión por medio del teléfono, por favor, utilice la siguiente información y marque por su teléfono. Por favor, marque 408-650-3123 y el código de acceso 426-369-749. Con línea de texto 661-241-8994. Para aquellos que participen por teléfono, pueden enviar sus comentarios y preguntas por mensaje de texto al 661-241-8994 durante la reunión. Si aún no lo ha hecho, por favor, tome el tiempo para hacer nuestra encuesta que está en el sitio web del proyecto avenueqcorridor.com. Gracias.
So in your meeting controls, you can click interpretation if you need it. Click the language that you would like to hear. You can click either English or Spanish. To hear the interpreted language only, you need to click the mute original audio.
Para escuchar la sesión en interpretación, en los controles de su reunión, haga clic en interpretación. Seleccione español. Para escuchar solo el idioma interpretado, haga clic en Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original.
Also, if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, you can raise your hand in the meeting controls using the raise your hand icon, or you can press *9 on the phone line. To lower your hand, if you want to remove the option to speak, you can click raise your hand in the meeting controls and it will disappear once you've already highlighted it. Comments and questions can also be provided in writing by using the Q&A function. So you can see that at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A button is located in the control panel. You just have to move your cursor down to bring it up. All questions and comments will be monitored by the project team. Written input that contains any offensive language or profanity will not be read. Verbal input that contains offensive language or profanity will be muted, and the participant will need to submit their input in writing. I also should mention that this meeting will be recorded and will be available on the project website.
Bien, si quiere hacer una pregunta, tendrá que levantar la mano. Haga clic en Raise Hand o levantar la mano en los controles de la reunión. O presione estrella 9 en la línea telefónica. Para bajar la mano, haga clic en Raise Hand o levantar la mano en los controles de la pantalla. Los comentarios y las preguntas también se pueden proporcionar por escrito mediante la función de Q y A. El botón de Q y A se encuentra en el panel de control en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Todas las preguntas y comentarios serán monitoreados por medio del equipo del proyecto. Comentarios por escrito que tengan verbaje, lenguaje que no sea apto grotesco, no se van a leer. Todo el mensaje que contenga verbaje ofensivo o palabras grotescas serán puestos en silencio y el participante tendrá que hacer sus preguntas o sus comentarios por escrito. Y esta sesión se está grabando. Y para tener acceso a la grabación va a estar en el sitio web de la ciudad.
All right, now I'm going to pass the meeting over to Megan Taggart, who is the project manager for the city of Palmdale.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us this evening. We're really excited to get your input on this very important project. Just to give a really broad overview, as some of you might be aware, we are planning for the future high-speed rail and other multimodal access to be available in this area. And so we are looking into preparing this study to see how to get people safely from the eastern corridor of Avenue Q over to the station, which will be constructed sometime in the future. So the study area really encompasses 20th Street East to Sierra Highway, and we're looking for some input on how people use the area now and how they would like to use it in the future. And we are really excited that you're here.
Thanks, Megan. Hi, everyone. My name is Carlos Hernandez. I'm a senior planner with Tool Design. We are an engineering, planning, and landscape architecture firm based out of Los Angeles. And I'm joined by my colleague, Adam Best, who's our engineering director in the LA office. And we also have Nancy, Celeste, and Chester from Ariano Associates, and they're leading the engagement for this project. So we're very excited about this project. For today's agenda, we want to go over some project goals and give an overview of what the project is. We've done a lot of work understanding Avenue Q and how it functions today. So we'll talk about our findings, our existing conditions, and some opportunities for improvement as well. I also want to talk about the title of this project is Avenue Q Complete Streets. And just to sort of define that, Complete Streets is a transportation and planning policy and really approach for streets to be planned, designed, and operated in a safe, convenient, and comfortable way, and specifically in a way for people of all ages and abilities. And this is regardless of their mode choice, if they're driving, if they're walking, or if they're biking. We think Avenue Q should serve everybody. So let's keep this in mind as we talk today and have a broader discussion. And as Megan mentioned, there are big plans for this general area, specifically the forthcoming transit hub, high-speed rail. So connections to the Metrolink station, the high-speed rail station, are going to be very important for this project. And not only that, we want to make sure that this project can envision Avenue Q as more of a calm downtown street. So we'll cover that in more detail. Next slide. As was mentioned, our project boundaries are Avenue Q from Sierra Highway to 20th Street. So it's approximately 1.4 miles. The street today is one lane, one traffic lane in each direction. And as you can see in this image, there's a lot of undeveloped space. So there's a lot of opportunities to reimagine what this street can look like. Next slide. So here are some of the goals for this project. As you can see, they're directly tied to the definition of a complete street. We want to make sure that Avenue Q improves conditions for people that choose to walk or bike, that there's continuous bike lanes and continuous sidewalks along Avenue Q. We definitely want to incorporate shade recommendations. We know how hot and how windy it can be, especially during the summer. And we're also going to complement the city's general plan update since there's a lot of work happening on that end. Next slide. Okay, so before we get into the details, we'd just love to take a quick poll, quick Q&A, open up for discussion, and really get to understand the community's perception on Avenue Q and how often they use Avenue Q. So we'll start off with a poll.
All right, on your screen, you should see 2 polling questions. We're going to do 2 at a time, so I'm going to read them off and then you can make your selection. And after you've answered both questions, we'll be able to see how many people have answered, and then we will present the results. So the first question is, and these sets of polling questions are focused on current use of the Avenue Q corridor. The first question is, do you walk or bike to destinations in and around the Avenue Q corridor? And you can select one. A is walk, B is bike, C is both, and D is none of the above. The second question is, to which destinations do you walk or bike? And you can select in this question all that apply. A is school, B is work, C is home, D is bus stop, E is park, F is businesses and stores, G is for exercise, H is for fun, I is none of the above, and J is other. So go ahead and take the time to answer those two questions. And after a high percentage of the people have finished, we will present the results.
We're at 77.
So about 77% have replied. Let's wait a few more seconds. Last chance, if you want to fill out the answer to these two questions, we're at about 81, 82% right now. So just give you a few seconds more to click on your votes. And then Carlos is going to talk about the results quickly and any thoughts he might have about that. All right, we're going to go ahead and show the results now. And Carlos, if you can respond to that.
All right. So for the first question, do folks on this call walk or bike to destinations on Avenue Q or around Avenue Q? You see that we have a couple people that do both. One person that bikes, but for the most part, no other people are walking or biking around destinations. The second question, which destinations do people just generally walk or bike to? We can see here that a lot of people are doing this for exercise. I know especially right now under the pandemic, walking and biking has been the main way I, sort of stay in shape and get to relax after work. There are some people that are walking home, some people walking to work, and then again, some people walking for fun. So we're gonna find that, through our investigations, we see, Avenue Q is mainly built for drivers, but there are opportunities if the conditions are right, of course, for people to walk for these reasons. So thank you for participating in that. I think we can move on, and we have a few more questions on the rest of the presentation. So make sure, folks get comfortable with participating with the poll. All right, next slide. So in our investigation, we've looked at a few different plans that the city has conducted previously that may have an impact on Avenue Q. Some of these plans you can see here, Palmdale General Plan Update, that's something that's actively happening right now. The Palmdale Transit Area Specific Plan, as well as a feasibility study on Avenue Q for the western portion of Avenue Q. So this is west of Sierra Highway. And a lot of these plans mention very similar things. That includes the development of mixed use buildings. So buildings that are 2, 3, 4 stories high where people can live above, and there may be shops or restaurants down below, more active ground use. A well-connected pedestrian and bike network. So making sure that there's complete sidewalks, crosswalks, and making sure that people that do want to ride their bike in these areas are able to do so in a full network. And there's also other things that we've covered and we've investigated, things like regulations on bicycle parking, the use of skateboards, things like that. And that's just one component of what we've investigated in our existing conditions work. Next slide. So those previous plans are very helpful. And in our work, we want to also just really get to understand Avenue Q and its impact on the community. So we've divided our mapping and analysis work into 4 main categories. And that includes who's impacted along Avenue Q, how does it function for people today, how do people generally get around, and then how comfortable is Avenue Q to get around without a car. Next slide. So I'm going to go over a few of these, and Adam's going to join me as well to cover those 4 main sections of analysis that we've done. So let's start with who's impacted along Avenue Q. And this is a quick summary, sort of high-level summary of our findings. We know that children, families, and older adults are impacted in this project area. They represent more than 1/4 of the population. We also know that children and older adults, they're some of the most vulnerable road users, right? They're not typically driving as often, and they're statistically some of the most vulnerable people on streets when we look at collisions. We also understand that there's a higher environmental burden in this area, the east side of Palmdale. When we look at Calvin-Byros screen, the east side of Palmdale faces higher environmental issues compared to the rest of the city. And that includes different things like higher exposure to pollution, to traffic, and it also includes poverty levels, education attainment, things like that. And again, this is a high-level snapshot, and we are collecting more information from the community. We're doing that today. We're doing that through a project survey. So in terms of who's impacted, this is information that we're collecting as the project goes, and it's only going to help with our investigation. Next slide. So I want to give just an overview of a couple of our analysis and our work. And as I mentioned, Calvin-Byros screen looks at census tracts within communities throughout California to see sort of the disproportionate impact of the environment. As you can see, the census tract north of our project area is higher in terms of risk and hazards compared to the bottom section. So again, these areas can include, missing infrastructure. It can be difficult to get around without a car. There can be high rates of traffic and pollution. So this is something that we're incorporating into our work. Next slide. We also looked at the current land use profile of the area. And you can see there's a pretty big difference between the north side of Avenue Q and the southern part of Avenue Q. The north side is mostly industrial. It's mostly undeveloped. And the south side is mostly residential. We know there's some houses, some apartments as well on the southern side. And land use is a key component of this project. We know that as the area develops, we want to make sure that the street can support future investment, and the street can really encourage people to walk and bike more. So our team is coordinating work on Avenue Q with the general plan update as well. And if we look at the next slide. This is the preferred land use alternatives as part of the general plan update. As you can see, the colors on the north side of the street change from a light blue, which was previously industrial, to a series of pink and orange. So the pink represents mixed use development. So again, that's the 3 to 4 story building with the restaurants at the bottom, condos or apartments up top. And then we also have some higher density neighborhood residential. So something that can match what we see today on the southern part of Avenue Q, more housing, more residential opportunities. And again, part of this project is really to connect people to the transit station and make sure that Avenue Q serves everybody that lives there. Next slide. So I just wanted to show an example of mixed use development. I know I've threw that word around a couple of times, but this is an example of what development can look like. And again, we want to make sure that Avenue Q can support active, more dynamic uses on the street. Now I'm going to hand the mic over to Adam, my colleague, who's going to talk about how Avenue Q functions for people today.
Thanks, Carlos. So for the most part, if you use Avenue Q today, you know that it's pretty one-dimensional and that its main function is really to serve people driving, as Carlos has been talking about. If you walk along Avenue Q today, or you cross it to get to important destinations, you also know that there are few safe crossing opportunities and that there are quite a few gaps in the sidewalk, which means you may find yourself walking on the side of the road on unpaved ground. You've also noticed the vacant lots in this area that Carlos touched on, and these will likely develop over time, and direct connections to them will be really important for the community. So just kind of keep that in mind as we talk through this presentation. So next slide. So as I mentioned, Avenue Q was primarily built for automobiles, but it also serves as an important east-west connection between Sierra Highway and Eastern Palmdale. Traffic volumes are really pretty low today, and if you drive along it, you know there isn't much delay. You can drive probably about as fast as you want to because there aren't many cars and the roadway is really wide. The speed limit also changes pretty dramatically as you approach Sierra Highway. So there's a 50-mile-per-hour speed limit east of 15th Street, a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit between 10th and 15th, and a 40-mile-per-hour speed limit between Sierra and 10th. But all of those are still pretty uncomfortable to walk or bike alongside of if someone's traveling at that speed. So we know speeding is a big cause of traffic collisions, and that higher speeds also result in more severe collisions. So looking at ways to slow down the corridor, especially through design, is really a big consideration for this project. Next slide. Our team also looked at the walking network around the project area, specifically sidewalk gaps. So there are some areas with paved sidewalks. They're mostly around developments or those residential today, that's where you see them, or commercial use. But there are really a lot of undeveloped and disconnected sidewalks out here as well. So on these images, you can see existing sidewalks in blue and missing sidewalks in the magenta or kind of purple pink color. And this image is just kind of an example of one of the kind of the nicer sidewalks with street lighting and vegetation along it in the area. Next slide. So in the study area, there are actually only 2 marked crosswalks as well. So there's one at Sierra Highway and one at 10th Street. So we want to be able to increase safe and comfortable crossing opportunities. And that's really a key element of this project. And these are just some more examples of what it's like to maybe walk along this area out here today. So next slide. And then, as I mentioned, there are some sidewalks that are along some of the commercial uses, which is important for people that are trying to walk to get to these places. Next slide. So here are also a few photos of the sidewalk conditions on Avenue Q. So you're probably already pretty familiar with conditions like these and how they can affect getting around without a car. I'd say especially the photo on the right where the grade of the shoulder is very steep and it's very difficult to walk on. But if you're on that side of the street, that's ultimately what the option is. Next slide. So how do people get around today? We heard a little bit about it from the survey or from the poll that you took, at least from the people on this call. But to answer this question, we have to look at options people have, right? So we looked at the missing sidewalk network, as I mentioned, but it's also kind of important to take a step back and see that the blocks on Avenue Q are also really large, and that limits crossing opportunities, among other things. So part of this project will be looking at physically and visually breaking them up and creating more enjoyable destinations along the street. We also know that few people are taking transit today, and the pandemic has had a huge impact on bus riders. So while transit along this street has low ridership, there are established routes along Avenue Q and opportunities for increasing service in the future as well. For people who do want to bike or are biking on Avenue Q today, the network is really incomplete, and it's difficult to get to the Metrolink station or other destinations safely and comfortably. Next slide. So on this map, the blue lines represent bus routes on and around Avenue Q that I was just talking about. Bus route 98 is the main route on Avenue Q, and that currently connects to the transportation center. There are a couple other lines that stop at the sheriff's station, for example. And I mentioned that bus ridership is really low today, but it can increase once more people start commuting to work or school more regularly post-pandemic. The green lines, or at least the green line that you can see here, it represents bikeways. There are very few existing bike lanes, but there are several planned bikeways on Avenue Q and 10th Street, for example. I would say one notable safe place to bike is the kind of the Dr. Robert St. Clair path that runs parallel to Sierra Highway. It's super nice and beautiful, but how do residents actually get to it, and what does it connect to? It's a great resource, but if we can't actually bike to it or walk to it safely, how easy is it to actually use it? Next slide, please. Next slide. So here are examples of the bus facilities on Avenue Q, at least a couple of them. Obviously, there's a clear difference between the bad and the good. And this project will also be identifying opportunities to improve bus stops along Avenue Q so that there is kind of protection from sun and rain, wind, those sorts of things. Next slide. And here's a one bike facility that is near Avenue Q, which is the trail that I mentioned previously. It's really nice, but again, how do we actually connect to it and how do people get to it safely? So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Carlos, and he's going to talk a little bit about how comfortable it may or may not be to use Avenue Q today.
Thanks, Adam. Next slide. So we've talked about who's impacted generally on Avenue Q, how the street functions for people, and how people are able to get around. We also looked at how comfortable Avenue Q is for people as they travel. And what we found at a very high level is it's a pretty high stress street in terms of walking and biking. We've looked at collisions and the collision history along Avenue Q. And we know that there's a lack of shade, specifically on the northern side, and we'll show you some examples of sort of our analysis for that. Next slide. Our team analyzed how stressful these streets can be for bicyclists. So in this analysis, you can see the red lines here. They represent higher stress streets. And they're the sort of common streets that we would expect, right? The streets with more travel lanes, with higher speeds, or the arterial streets. So those are represented in red. Sierra Highway, 10th Street, 15th Street, and of course, Avenue Q. And the blue lines represent streets that may be less stressful because they are typically narrower, they have less traffic, and they have slower speed drivers. So as you can see, those blue lines represent more sort of neighborhood streets. You won't find as many commuters on them. And what we found is we essentially have small pockets of streets that are easy to bike on. And they're surrounded by a network of very busy, very high stress streets. And Adam mentioned the Dr. Robert St. Clair path, and it comes up in the map. You can see a blue line just west of Sierra Highway, but as he mentioned, how does someone from the neighborhood connect to that bikeway to be able to walk and bike for recreation or for exercise? It's very difficult. So overall, linking bike lanes on Avenue Q can better connect these surrounding neighborhoods. Next slide. We also looked at collisions on Avenue Q and the broader area. We analyzed the period of 2015 to 2019. Sierra Highway at Avenue Q has one visible injury for a pedestrian or for a person walking. But all the other crashes on Avenue Q within that time frame are all vehicle related crashes, so vehicle crashes. And again, this is one snapshot of looking at safety on the street. We saw that map earlier where it had the posted speed limit that was for 40, 45 to 50 miles per hour. And even though the historic data is telling us that there may not be a lot of severe or fatal crashes for people walking or for people biking on Avenue Q, we understand that the conditions on Avenue Q can cause crashes in the future. So we want to make sure through this project, we address things like speeding and the lack of safe crossing opportunities. Next slide. And finally, for existing conditions, we looked at shade along Avenue Q. Like I said, it's very hot, very windy in the high desert. So we modeled the sun's path on the existing buildings along Avenue Q. So I'm showing you a snapshot of the corridor. So this is from 10th Street to 15th Street. This is the area where you'll find apartments, so sort of higher density apartments. They're also taller, 2-3 stories. And the period that we modeled here is December. So this is during the winter solstice. These are the best conditions for shade on Avenue Q. As you can see, the southern part of the sidewalk has pretty good amount of shade during this December period. But if we look at the next slide, we captured that same stretch of Avenue Q from 10th Street to 15th Street during the peak summer month. So this is during June, and obviously the sun hangs a lot higher during June. So shade here is pretty much non-existent. The north side sort of has full sun, full exposure at all times. So through this project, we want to make sure we replicate those conditions and we find opportunities to create more shade. Next slide. So to summarize our existing conditions work, we know that Avenue Q was primarily built for driving on. There are few safe crossing opportunities or few marked crossings that exist there today. We know it's higher stress, especially for people that are riding and trying to connect from the neighborhood to other destinations. But as much as these are constraints, there's also a lot of opportunity on Avenue Q. And we think that this project should connect residents to destinations and can really improve the quality of life for everybody in the neighborhood. So with that, we wanted to open up an opportunity to answer some questions. I know we have a few questions.
All right. So we have a question from Ebony Bailey. Will apartments located on Avenue Q between Sierra Highway and 11th Street East be knocked down?
So I'll answer a portion of that, and that is, this project really seeks to address the public right-of-way, so the streets and sidewalks along Avenue Q. This project also as mentioned in the goals, is going to complement future development along Avenue Q. So really focused on more of the vacant areas and making sure that as they develop, we have a street that supports more active use and more people walking and biking.
All right. We also have another comment for a question from Jamal. It looks like Gory. It says, greetings. I've been an avid bicycle rider in Los Angeles County for over 45 years, 22 years in Palmdale. And I take my life into my own hands every time I ride on Avenue Q to access the bike trail on Sierra Highway. The bike trail is desperately needed on Avenue Q, as well as the length of Technology Road. I'd like to live to tell my great-grandchildren about the good old days of more adventurous bike riding in Palmdale.
Yeah, this is just a great comment overall. You know, again, this project really aims to connect people of all ages and abilities, right? So not necessarily just looking at the standard bike lane, but really rethinking how can we create a world-class bike facility that's separate from traffic. And we'll go over those details a little bit more in our opportunities section, but thank you for the comment.
All right, guys, have a couple more. One is from Paul Texan. It says the north boundary line noted abuts P12 Street. Also, how does the Q corridor project affect a smaller minor street, 12th Street East?
Great question. So this project is solely focused on Avenue Q, but as you mentioned, there are sort of intersecting streets where we want to be able to address how people can connect to Avenue Q. I did show in our level of stress for bicyclists in particular, 12th Street is illustrated as a blue street or a less stressful street. So there are definitely going to be opportunities down the line for this network, the bike network, to build out and to develop. But this project will really address the intersection and how side streets intersect with Avenue Q.
All right, and the final question we have right now is from Teresa Howard. I am the administrator at the middle school on Avenue Q between 20th and 25th East, Palmdale Prep Academy. Many of our students come from all over the Antelope Valley. Will there be increased city bus stops along Avenue Q for our students to use? And she would also like to request sidewalks near the school for the students and parents to safely cross the street.
Yeah, that's a great observation. You know, we want to make sure that through this project, transit riders and bus riders are addressed. We'll have some slides showing some of those opportunities. And just know, Teresa, we are in coordination with AVTA, and we are incorporating sort of these recommendations into the existing bus stops and having conversations on in terms of ridership, in terms of the lines that are active right now, and really how we can just create better environment for people that are taking the bus and waiting at a bus stop.
Great. I think we're going to do poll number 2. Bring that up. All right. There are 2 questions again. I'm going to read both of them off and then you can answer both of them and then we'll look at the results. These questions deal with perceptions of Avenue Q. The first question is the Avenue Q corridor needs improvements. So you get to select one. A is strongly agree, B is somewhat agree, D is somewhat disagree, and E is strongly disagree. And then the second question is, what are your major concerns when you try to walk, bike, or drive along Avenue Q? And you can select all that apply. A is few safe crossing opportunities. B is incomplete sidewalk network. C is incomplete bike network. D is lack of lighting at night. E is lack of shade protection from the weather. F is few bus stops amenities. G is none of the above. And H is I don't have concerns. And I is other. So go ahead and fill those answers in and we'll give you a couple minutes and then we'll look at the results. We're at 72%, so we'll just wait a few more seconds here. So if you haven't answered, please take the time to put in your answers. All right, so we're going to go ahead and look at the results. And Carlos, maybe you can talk about the observations you have from the results.
Sounds good. All right, for the first question, the Avenue Q corridor needs improvements, and 89% of respondents strongly agree. There's a couple people that somewhat agree, but it's overwhelmingly positive in terms of the need for Avenue Q to see some improvement. And then the second question is, what are your major concerns? We had a few different categories. I'm just going to scroll down on my end. A large number of people highlighted that there's few safe crossing opportunities, incomplete sidewalk network, and lack of lighting. So those are the big three categories that stand out as priorities for people. And there's also a few people, imagine the bike riders in the audience, that state there's an incomplete bike network for people that are riding and trying to get around. And then there's a contingent of transit riders who would argue that there's few bus stop amenities along Avenue Q. And then there's a few people as well who talked about the lack of shade. So definitely some of the things that we're both investigating and coming up with some improvement typologies for. So thank you all for participating. This is all really helpful feedback. And again, it's going to help us sort of prioritize and dial in what are some of the highest concerns and how we can address them through this project. All right, so we've talked about some of the goals for this project. Adam and I covered our analysis and investigating existing conditions and how Avenue Q functions for people today. And we wanted to talk this part of the agenda about the opportunities on Avenue Q that our team will look to further develop. But we want to get some initial feedback today and really present some of the opportunities that we found on our side as we're doing the planning for this project. So the first being, definitely develop a continuous network of sidewalks and making sure that Avenue Q has continuous sidewalks. This is a key opportunity. You saw the poll, one of the big three questions that people responded to in terms of priority was making sure that there's just continuous sidewalks along the street. Next slide. So another feature that we are looking to further develop in this project is just to establish more crossing opportunities and more consistent crossing opportunities. We've investigated several locations where these can be installed or implemented, as well as the different types of crossings. You may be familiar with these different parts of the city. So on the left, we have a flashing beacon. This is typically on sort of narrower streets that don't have a lot of travel lanes. And if you're familiar with this one, you know, a person can go up, hit the button, and we have a flashing beacon, so the flashing lights and the signage. And on the right, you have a full signal, again, that is a great sort of traffic control mechanism that stops traffic and allows people to cross. And I believe there's some flashing beacons recently installed along 10th Street by Corson Park. So there's an opportunity to go check them out, how they function. These are some of the treatments that we're looking at for this project. Next slide. So in terms of the crossing opportunities, I want to just give a quick snapshot. These are the existing marked crossings on Avenue Q within our project area. So there's two signals, one at Sierra Highway and one at 10th Street. And these are the only marked crossings, again, for people to cross Avenue Q. Now, we know people are crossing Avenue Q at different parts of the street, but again, these are the only locations where there's marked crossings. And if you go to the next slide, in terms of opportunities for more marked crossings, we're looking at places like 9th Street, 12th Street, 15th, 17th, and 20th Street to be able to have different types of marked crossings. So just safer, more consistent opportunities for people to cross Avenue Q. Another opportunity is we want to establish continuous bike lanes on Avenue Q. Again, it's one of the key goals for this project. We want to make sure that residents from the neighborhoods, from the area, can directly connect to the Metrolink station, the future high-speed rail station. And there's a couple of different varieties of bike lanes. Here I'm just showing a couple, two different types. So there's the standard bike lane that people may be familiar with. It's two white lines on the roadway. And then to the right, we have a separated bike lane, and this separates people riding bikes completely from moving cars. So in terms of developing a bikeway and a bike network that serves people of all ages and all abilities, the one on the right is definitely one that may be more attractive to residents. So we'll continue to investigate which type of bike facility we'd want to propose, and also get, just general feedback from the community. Next slide. So at key intersections, I know one of these questions was asked, what happens on side streets. So we want to make sure that people that want to ride on Avenue Q in a safe way, that they can connect to Avenue Q. And at intersections, there's a few different ways to do this. Bike treatments can really help bicyclists across Avenue Q or connect directly to Avenue Q. And the green paint, as you can see here, it really highlights the potential conflicts between people driving and people riding bikes. So again, another feature that we're looking to propose for this project. Next slide. Developing consistent shade is another key opportunity. It's very important. I know we've talked about shade a lot. And we're gonna start by focusing on key locations like at bus stops, where we can provide shade for people that are waiting, maybe standing there 20, 30 minutes. But we also wanna establish a rhythm of shade throughout Avenue Q. And that can include using things like shade structures, tree canopies, or even the canopy of a building. You saw a couple of images earlier on of the December snapshot where the buildings on the south side of Avenue Q were actually providing the sidewalk a lot of shade. So again, this is something we want to replicate and make sure that there's consistent shade on Avenue Q. And finally, Avenue Q should function for people taking the bus. We saw a couple of images of the bus stop conditions today. Some of them may just be a sign, others already have transit shelters, but this can include just more frequent appearance of shelters, shelters that have amenities like benches, waste containers, real-time bus information. And all of these improvements, they should work to encourage more trips without the use of a car and make sure that people can connect via bus to the future high-speed rail station. So those are some of the opportunities and some of the treatments that we have initially identified for Avenue Q. Now, there may be others that you can think of as well. I encourage folks to throw them in the chat if you can think of other ideas, other things you've seen in other parts of Palmdale or in other cities that help people walk, bike, or take transit along the street. Definitely throw them in the chat. So at this moment, we'd love to do one more poll. And actually, we have two more polls, but we want to do this poll to respond to some of the features and some of the opportunities that I just talked about. So we'll pass it over to Chester.
All right, so this is our third poll. Again, 2 questions. The poll is focused on priorities and desires of the community. The first question is, do you agree or disagree with the opportunities that have been identified? And you get to select one. So you're either going to select strongly agree, somewhat disagree, or strongly disagree. The second question for this poll is, what does a complete street on Avenue Q look like to you? And you get to select all that apply. Your first choice is continuous sidewalks, more crossing options, bike lanes in the road, separated and buffered bike facilities not in the road, better connections for bicyclists, consistent shade, better bus stop amenities, better lighting along the corridor, none of the above, and other. So again, go ahead and fill in your responses. We'll give you a few minutes and then we'll look at the results. Just a few seconds more. If you could just put your answers in and then we'll switch over to the results. All right, we're going to switch to the results and then Carlos, you can do your commentary again.
Sounds good. All right, the first question is, do folks agree or disagree with the opportunities that have been identified and have been presented? We have 12 respondents who strongly agree and 5 respondents who somewhat agree. Great to hear that there's just general agreement on some of these opportunities. I think some are pretty, they're pretty sort of obvious, right, in terms of developing a sidewalk network. But let's jump into the second question to get more into the details and sort of some of the improvement types that we can propose on this project. So what does a complete street on Avenue Q look like to you? Again, continuous sidewalks is a key part of this project. Better lighting along the corridor. I think that's something that's definitely the case. We don't think about lighting until the sun goes down, until we're out there at night and sort of experience this. So that's definitely something that people are responding to. More crossing opportunities and consistent shade and better bus stop amenities. I like to combine those two typically. As we noted, we're going to look at some key areas where we want to definitely intensify shade, especially at bus stops. There's, usually people are going to be waiting there, as well as carry a consistent rhythm of shade throughout the street. And then bike lanes in the road. We have a small number of people that are responding to them, but I know we also have some comments about the bike lanes, what, sort of the location, whether there's separation or not. So we'll go into that a little bit as well. Chester, did we have 2 more questions or were there?
Yes, we have a few more questions.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and take those now. The first questions comes from Sammy, looks like Michael or Michelle. It's, will the study address the homeless environment and drugs around Avenue Q?
It's a great question. So we do have, as part of this project, understanding safety, not only looking at traffic safety, but personal safety is definitely something that the community may be concerned about. It's something that we may want to know about. In terms of this project, we want to make sure that there's plenty of lighting at night. There's more active use. In our line of work, we really focus on things like lighting and active use to just create more eyes on the street and making sure that safety is addressed. So from that perspective, this project can tangentially address things like crime, things like personal safety along Avenue Q.
All right, we have another question from Garlinia Davis. Would it be helpful to have those, oops, your question is moving through here, hold on a second. Okay. Would it be helpful to have those who listed others give their specifics in the meeting, or is that something you will present at another meeting?
I see. In the, I believe it's in the poll option where it says other. Again, we invite people who are typing in other to maybe place it in the chat. So for the last couple questions, especially for the question of what does a complete street look like to you? We invite folks to just type in the chat. We can even do a one-word sort of answer of what it looks like to you. I know some of the comments are coming in around bike lanes, around safety, around visibility. So yeah, we invite people to type those in the chat for this meeting, and we can discuss them here. And we're also recording this information. Again, we're continuing to collect this data and making sure that when we ask people, what does a complete street mean to you, that we're addressing very specific things, right? Whether it's more crossing opportunities, whether it's lighting, whether it's curb ramps, anything, that specific, we want to make sure to capture all that and include that in this project.
All right, another question from Garlinia Davis is, I like the bike lane on the right. However, will that reduce the vehicle lanes? I really don't want the vehicle lanes reduced.
Yeah, this is a great question. Part of this project currently, Avenue Q has 2 travel lanes, one in each direction, one headed eastbound, one headed westbound. They're pretty wide travel lanes. They're around 12, sometimes 14, sometimes 20 feet, depending on the striping. And we've also found that the shoulder right of way is very wide. So as part of our investigation and part of the design, once this project is completed, we want to make sure that we preserve the 2 travel lanes, or the 1 travel lane in each direction. And any new bikeway that is included will be separate from the existing travel lanes, right? So it's not, we won't be removing any travel lanes as part of this project. We'll really be looking to add to the roadway. And then one more comment is the example I showed did have a bike lane that was bi-directional. So instead of having 1 bike lane going eastbound, and 1 bike lane going westbound, those 2 bike lanes are basically put together side by side, and that also allows for some saving of space.
All right, great. Another question from Paul Texan. He just wants to confirm that the Avenue Q corridor project is located in the future downtown district, leading to transportation center with high-speed rail station projects for California high-speed rail and Brighton to Las Vegas, LA, Antelope Valley.
So yeah, one of the goals of this project is to create not only Avenue Q as a destination, right? Not only create a more comfortable, safe, calm, active Avenue Q, but ensure that the communities surrounding it can connect to the future high-speed rail station, and that's definitely tied to some of the other work that is happening with the transit area specific plan, the high-speed rail plan. This again being a component of those plans. We want to make sure that this street can connect directly to those transit stations and do it for people specifically walking, biking, and taking transit.
All right, the final question we have right now is from Sammy Michael. It says, does the study address the type of developments intended for the north side of Avenue Q?
Great question. So in our study, we are working in coordination with the type of development intended for the north side. So I had shown a slide throughout the middle of the presentation that that showed the current land use designations for the north side. It's mostly industrial, and then the alternative land use designations, and that is really led by the general plan update. And that shows the north side as not industrial, but it shows it as more of residential and mixed use land use type. So the development that occurs there will definitely support this project and the support at the design for Avenue Q. But this project, again, is really intended to make sure that it can connect future residents on the north side to destinations and to the high-speed rail station.
All right, Carlos, we have one more question that came in. It's from Mark Drever. Will the city use eminent domain to acquire houses?
Through this project, we are not investigating that, and I'll also open to the city to chime in just generally, but this project is really focused again on the curb to curb or the public right of way to make sure that, you know, our design sort of not only complements the area, but that it geometrically fits within the roadway we have today.
Sure, and I'll just chime in on that one. So the intent of this project is not to remove development that's there currently or to even propose future development. It's to plan for future access along the Avenue Q corridor and analyze different modes of access to find out what best fits with the community's vision and the city's vision. So it doesn't propose any actual development, but it'll be used as a tool for future developers when they're doing improvements to the roadway in the future.
All right, we're going to do another poll now. Poll number 4. And this poll, again, is focused on priorities and desires of the community. Let's wait for the questions to come up. Would you use the Avenue Q corridor more often if improvements like these were made? And you get to select one. Would you be more likely, less likely, or not sure? And then the second question for this poll is, would improvements like these better connect you to a future high-speed rail and Metrolink station without the use of a car? And your choices here are more likely, less likely, not sure, and what is high-speed rail? Go ahead and put your answers in, and then we'll take a look at the results. Give just a couple more seconds and then we'll go to the results. All right, let's go to the results and let Carlos take a look.
All right, so 75% said that you'd be more willing or more likely to use Avenue Q if there were improvements like these made. There's a few folks that aren't sure. I think once the improvements are made, that 25% would move into the other bucket, is my guess. But this is great feedback so far. And then would improvements like these better connect you to a future high-speed rail station or Metrolink station without the use of a car? So that's the big qualifier there. And many people said that it would more likely connect people to the Metrolink and high-speed rail station, and a few that are not sure. So this is great feedback. Sounds like some good optimism for this project, and definitely some higher level priorities for people walking, connecting in and around the neighborhood. All right, so thank you everyone for the feedback. We just have a few more slides before we wrap this up. And I wanted to cover our next steps. And I know there was one question asking about just a general timeline. So right now we are completing our analysis and really kickstarted the community engagement portion of this project. We're going to continue community engagement. We want to make sure to capture everybody's sort of priorities, concerns, feedback, and make sure that we can incorporate all of this and create some draft recommendations for this project. And the project is scheduled to close during the fall of this year. We will have another community meeting for this project. But before that, we have a project survey that we encourage and invite everybody to take. I think our team may include that in the chat, the survey link. And before we wrap it up, we had just a few more questions. We wanted to get a sense of how people heard about this project, and how they heard about this meeting as well. So if we go to the next slide. We have just one more poll. And again, we want to really understand how people are staying in touch, and get to some general feedback from you.
All right, so we have 3 questions in this poll. This is our final poll. Have you taken the project survey yet? Simple yes or no. Second question is, how did you hear about this meeting? You can select all that apply. If you heard about it in multiple ways, please check all those ways. It helps us just understand how this works in terms of notification. But your choices are email, social media, mail, postcards, word of mouth, community neighborhood organizations, and other. And then your third question is, what are the most effective ways to reach your neighbors to ask for their input on this topic? And you can again select all that apply, and your choices are email, social media, mail, postcards, word of mouth, and community neighborhood organizations, and other. So again, go ahead and please quickly fill out your results. Give you a minute or two to do that, and then we'll go to the results. All right, so let's look at the results.
All right, so a good handful of people have taken the project survey. That's great. We have a lot more tailored and defined questions in that survey, and it'll be very helpful for everybody to take it. And not only that, spread the word. Make sure you share the survey with others in and around the area. We want to hear from everyone throughout the Palmdale neighborhood and throughout this neighborhood in particular, and really capture again their feedback so we can incorporate into the plan. For folks in attendance at this meeting, most people heard about it through email. I know we have an email blast going, social media as well. And there's a few people that heard it through word of mouth and through neighborhood and community organizations. So again, though any way we can get this information out, I think it just makes it a more fruitful project, a stronger project. What are the most effective ways to reach your neighbors to ask for their input on this project? A lot of you are sticking to the top 2 ways we've been reaching people, which is email and social media. But there's a good handful of people that do appreciate word of mouth, snail mail or postcards, and then just direct communication with community organizations. I think that's always going to be impactful in any project we work on.
All right, thanks, Carlos. We have a couple more questions. One is from Sammy Michelle, and it is street widening being considered?
So we're currently looking at sort of the priorities and how Avenue Q functions today. We have looked at some traffic volumes, and we understand, for that this street can definitely today support some of the recommendations that we've outlined here: continuous sidewalks, bike lanes, things of that nature. And I'll invite Adam to chime in a little bit more on the traffic impact analysis or traffic analysis that we have done as well.
Sure. So we're also going to consider what the future conditions may be as well, and that's probably more specific to your question, which is if we're increasing development and the high-speed rail station is coming in, that we'll likely experience more activity. So one thing that we will do is kind of project some of those traffic volumes to assess what the need is. That could be a possibility, that could be a recommendation, but I don't think we're certainly not wedded to it, but it's at least something that we will explore to assess what those impacts of future conditions may be on Avenue Q, east and west of Sierra Highway.
All right. We also have a question from Garlinia Davis. How far west will Avenue Q be completed?
So this project, the boundaries on this project in the westbound direction stop at Sierra Highway. We want to make sure that this project connects to the Robert St. Clair path that exists there today. We want to make sure that Sierra Highway and that intersection is comfortable. But ultimately, this project intends to connect to the future high-speed rail station, which I showed a rendering in one of the earlier slides and create a direct connection. At this moment, there's sort of a T intersection there. So, through separate efforts, we want to make sure that this project connects directly to the future high-speed rail station.
All right, and our final question from the Q&A function is from Bhushan. And what is the time frame for completion of the project?
As I mentioned, we're currently wrapping up our analysis and incorporating a lot of this feedback. Community engagement is scheduled to run through the summer, and then we'll wrap up community engagement with a second community meeting where we will present some of the draft recommendations and have some sort of renderings and concept plans prepared for that community meeting, and then complete this project in the fall of this year.
All right, we have one more question now from Paul Texan. Will there be a pedestrian bridge to connect Avenue Q to the transportation station?
Yeah, it's a great question. We may have to sift through some of our plans to see what the direct sort of connection is west of Sierra Highway. So for this project, we want to make sure we make it to Sierra Highway, have a direct connection to Sierra Highway, but it's something that we'll further investigate.
Carlos, this is Mike Behan, Deputy City Manager. I can add to that.
Okay.
Avenue Q is planned as an underpass as part of the California high-speed rail infrastructure improvements. So there will definitely be pedestrian and bicycle and vehicular connectivity from the east side to the west side. But you're right, Carlos, good question.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to chime in on the previous response about completion of the project. I just want to make sure that there's not any confusion. We're referring to the completion of this study, not completion of the roadway improvements that will be envisioned by this study.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Mike, both for clarifying.
All right, we have one person who's raised their hand, Sammy Michelle, I think that's how you say your last name. We're going to unmute your mic. And then after we unmute your mic, please just announce yourself and unmute yourself as well. And then you should be able to speak. So go ahead, Sammy. It looks like you're muted on your end, so you need to unmute your mic. If you go down to the bottom left of your panel on your screen, there should be a mute button and unmute button. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, for the property between 15th Street and 20, a lot of vacant land there.
Por interrupción técnica.
Is he going to be improving this property?
¿Van a haber mejoras en esta propiedad?
Go ahead, Sammy, keep going.
So the city going to improve properties along south side of Avenue Q between 15 and 20. And if this is going to be improving, are they going to do sidewalks and do street lights and all that stuff?
Yeah, so part of this project is looking at proposing opportunities for continuous sidewalks, lighting, all those elements that I had sort of presented earlier. And definitely 15th to 20th Street is within the project area. So we're going to further investigate that for both the north side and the south side of the street. And again, we're solely focused on the public right of way, so the street and the sidewalk. And want to make sure that, you know, it supports more people walking and biking.
All right, Carlos, that looks like the questions that we've gotten so far, both in terms of the Q&A function as well as people raising their hands. So I think there's a couple more slides for you to cover and we can wrap it up.
Thank you, Chester. All right, well, I'll just say thank you to everybody for participating in the poll and asking the questions. Again, we're collecting all this information to just make a more robust study and project and provide some recommendations to the city on how we can make Avenue Q work for everybody. So I'm gonna hand it over to Megan at the city.
Before you hand it over, there is one last question that came in.
Okay.
It's from Joel Horowitz, and it's, do you intend to annex the north side of the project into the city?
I'll field that one. So this study does not include annexation of any properties that are currently within the unincorporated area of Los Angeles County. The pocket that you're referring to is within the sphere of influence for the city, but it is not currently part of the city, as you know, and this project is not anticipating to annex that as part of this project.
Great. I think, Carlos, you are already passing it over to Megan anyways.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody. We'll continue to work on this project, and I'm going to hand it over to Megan at the city to close this out. And thank you, everyone.
Sure. I just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to participate in our presentation today and ask such great questions and give great feedback so that we can use it to help us as we move forward with this study. We look forward to continuing our outreach and to getting more input from all of you in the future. And we really appreciate you taking the time this evening.
So great. Just as a quick reminder, we have recorded this. It will be posted online. Again, you can go to the project website at avenueqcorridor.com, where you'll also find the survey if you haven't taken that. And again, we want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules and night to be with us tonight. And I think it was a very productive meeting, lots of great questions and information. And we, again, thank you very much. Have a good evening.